Hello Internet, it's Matt here for the Dork Lords. I have a case of the sniffles today. My apologies, but sniffles shall not keep me from my appointed dorkly rounds. So here we go. We're gonna tough it out. Okay, so if you're new to the channel, welcome. We talk about all manner of dorkly things here. So whether it's sci-fi, fantasy, superheroes, we probably have a playlist about it. Feel free to check us out. Today is another in our Dork Lord of the Rings segments. And the topic today I chose because in previous videos, when I'm talking about a particular event, I keep referencing this one event. Everything seems to come back to this moment in time. And so I thought, all right, enough with just sub-referencing it. We should have a whole video about it. And so that's what today is. Today, we're going to be talking about the Downfall of Numenor. Okay, so as you know, the War of the Ring takes place at the end of the Third Age. The Downfall of Numenor takes place in the Second Age. So it's thousands of years earlier. And you might be saying, well, hey, that doesn't really have anything to do with Lord of the Rings per se, but it does. And specifically, there's a few really cool tie-ins to Lord of the Rings. But primarily, the characters of Aragorn and Sauron, your two big players, have a lot to do with Numenor and its downfall. So that's why this video is important for Lord of the Rings fans. Okay. Let's go back real fast. End of the First Age was finished with the Battle of Wrath. And that was where Morgoth, who was the big baddie at the time, was captured. Now, he was not killed. That's important. He was sent off to the void. So he's imprisoned off in the void, basically. And actually, just a little side note here is that Tolkien originally had an idea for his version of Ragnarok. The Norse last battle. His was Dagor-Dagorath. And in that last battle, Morgoth would find his way. He would escape the void, come back, lay waste to Earth, and then be defeated by a collection of heroes. I think in the end, Tolkien decided not to include that in his history. Anyway, at one time, he thought perhaps Morgoth would escape the void. But as of the Second Age and the Third Age, he is still stuck up there. So his second in command was Sauron. Okay, so Sauron's still around. And the Second Age is kind of the age of Sauron being a jerk. So Middle-earth looks different. Geographically, politically, a lot is different. But Mordor is still there. And Mordor is Mordor. That's where Sauron lives. Okay. So he starts taking over the continent. Numenor is an island. It's an island off to the west of Middle-earth. It's kind of between Middle-earth and Valinor, where the Valar live, the angelic beings, which is also important for later. So I'm doing it backwards, but basically Middle-earth, Numenor, Valinor. Okay. So on the island of Numenor, these Numenorian, they're humans, but they have a strong bond with the elves, and they have the premier fighting force in the world at that point. And so they come over to Middle-earth to do Middle-earth a favor, and they crush Sauron's forces. They drive Sauron back to Mordor, where, he's kind of, dug in. And so instead of laying siege to him for years, they're like, that's fine. He's in Mordor. He hasn't claimed any lands. We'll leave you in Mordor. Goodbye. So the Numenorians depart. Now, some of them do set up settlements. There are settlements that spring up as a result of them coming over here to help fight Sauron. But for the most part, most of Numenor returned to their island. Okay, so Sauron spends a few hundred years gathering his forces and comes back again. And he's taking over Middle-earth again. It's like, you! So Numenor responds again, to their credit. They come over. This is their leader at the time is King Ar-Pharazôn. And I'll say this about them. They're arrogant. All right. So yes, they realize they know that they're the power in the world. So they're like, all right, we'll come do your dirty work for you, Middle Earth. So they show up and quickly dispatch Sauron's forces this time. They send a big enough navy and everything that within a year, they have defeated Sauron. Sauron realizes, oops, can't beat these guys. I might as well join them. So this is where Sauron does his manipulative trick. At this time, Sauron is not the Sauron that we know in the War of the Ring. He's still, he's got an appealing visage. He can charm people, be manipulative. And so, yeah, he's not just a guy wearing giant iron crown thing and like, I'm a ghost. He's not that guy. Okay. So he agrees. He's like, you know what? You got me, Ar-Pharazôn and the Numenorians. Take me in. I'm your prisoner. And not thinking twice about it, Ar-Pharazôn's like, awesome. I'm just imprisoning Sauron. I'm going to take him back to Numenor with me. So Sauron is the prisoner of the Numenorians on the island of Numenor for about 50 years. I think it's 48 years. We'll just say 50. 50 years, he's their captive. Now, during that time, he starts to work on them. And he is successful. So what happens is, he plays on the fact that the Numenorians, in a lot of ways, they're arrogant, I mentioned. They're powerful. And they're jealous. Some of the higher-ups are jealous of the Valar, the angelic beings off to the west. Because the Valar are immortal. Numenorians aren't. They're mortal beings. They're humans. And in fact, Ar-Pharazôn's getting up in years, and he's realizing his own mortality. And so Sauron starts playing on those fears. Look, I'm just a prisoner here, but I know some things. I am a Maya spirit. I'm connected with the Valar. I know their ways. And he tells them, hey, you know what? You can get to immortality if you start worshiping Morgoth, who's trapped up in the void. Over time, this plan of Sauron's works. Okay, so what you start seeing is a section of the Numenorians start worshiping Morgoth. And there's an important moment that happens in there, very relevant, but I'm gonna hold off on that for a second, just to say that what ends up happening is there's a split. It's almost like two political parties. There are the Kingsmen, they're not Englishmen who get weapons out of a haberdashery, but they are called the Kingsmen. So there's the Kingsmen, and then there is the faithful. Okay, so the Kingsmen are definitely the majority. The faithful, kind of a minority party. Okay, basically the difference between the two, among others, but the main difference is the Kingsmen are really more of like, Numenor is awesome, boo to the Valar. The faithful are like, look, we owe a lot to the Valar. We will respect them as our betters. And so, in fact, there's a thing called the Bane of the Valar. And the Bane is that they have not allowed the Numenorians to sail west of Numenor any farther than they can see their own shoreline. So in other words, that's as far west as you're allowed to go, Numenor. If you go farther west than that, you're breaking with the Valar. And so just do that at your own peril. And so the Kingsmen are riled up against that. They're riled against the fact that the Valar have this gift of immortality. They could probably share it with the Numenorians. Why not? The Numenorians are awesome. We're really powerful. We deserve everything that the Valar get. Faithful are like, nah, I think you're reading too much into this. Now, obviously, history, Tolkien history, is going to look much more kindly on the faithful, as you'll see, than on the Kingsmen. Okay, so, but that's what you've got. You got the Kingsmen and the faithful. Sauron works his magic on the Kingsmen, and they start worshiping Morgoth. One of the things that Sauron convinces them is, how you get immortality? human sacrifice. That's right, there's human sacrifice in this story. So the Kingsmen start sacrificing members of the faithful, right? They're like, hey, these guys are, you know, they don't have anybody stand up for them anyway. We'll throw these guys on fires. And so, yeah, they're really, you know, Numenor is turning into a real dystopian place, thanks to Sauron. And it should be noted that one of the reasons Sauron is doing this is because the Numenorians keep showing up every time he's trying to conquer Middle-earth, and their army is better. So he's trying to corrupt them from the inside. And he's good at that. So, a notable family that is a member of the faithful, the patriarch of the family is Amundil, and his son is Elendil. You might remember Elendil's name because he's the one that gets killed off by Sauron at the War of the Last Alliance to end the Second Age, right? Elendil's two sons are Isildur and Anarion. And so, you know, the Argonath, those huge two statues you see in the movies where they're on the river, that's Isildur and Anarion. Anyway, but Isildur, we've talked about him many times. As you know, he's the one who cuts the ring off of Sauron's hand and helps to win that war of the Last Alliance. But it's Elendil who is killed in that battle, but got there, you know, lay siege forever. Anyway, so Elendil is currently on the island of Numenor, and his dad, Amundil, is actually the leader of the faithful. Keep in mind also, obviously, the line of Elendil / Isildur is the line of Aragorn. So these are Aragorn's ancestors, and they are in real trouble. They're in the minority at the moment on an island filled with people kind of doing some really evil things. It becomes apparent to Amundil that what Ar-Pharazôn, the king, and with Sauron's help, is doing is they're creating a giant army. They're calling it the Great Armament, biggest army ever for Numenor, and they're going to sail west and take on the Valar. They're going to fight gods, basically. They're going to fight the angels. So Amundil is very, you know, obviously worried about this. This is horrible. The portents are terrible for this. So he says to his son Elendil, you need to prepare some ships, 9 ships, as it turned out, on the east coast. Keep them stocked, keep them ready, in case you need to make an escape with the family. That'd be Isildur and those folks. So Elendil does so, and he waits for the day when they might need to escape. Meanwhile, Amundil decides he's going to sail west to try to warn the Valar and kind of beg them for mercy. Like, look, we're not all bad, and by the way, you've got a big army coming behind me, but please, you know, spare me, and you do have followers here, the faithful. Thing is, no mortal is allowed to go there. I mentioned the Bane. They can't go past a certain point and not have repercussions. As we know, I've mentioned in a previous video, actually, when I was talking about Elrond, one of his ancestors, Irindil, is like the only mortal to have ever done it. But he did it. He sailed west and lived to tell the tale. So maybe Amundil's like, I'm taking my cue from that guy. Hopefully I can sail off, do this warning, and you know, not suffer the consequences. Unfortunately, we never hear from him again. There's nothing in any Tolkien tale that tells what happened. He just sailed away and disappeared. Obviously, little Occam's razor says that, you know, he was dispatched because he broke the law, you know, of the Valar. But, you know, you could carve a hopeful ending for him where maybe he got to the Valar, talked to them. They said, well, you can't ever go back, but we'll spare your family, because his family is inevitably spared the destruction of Numenor. So you want to put a kind spin on it? Maybe that's what happened. Probably more likely he bit the dust. But in any case, that's Elendil's father. I always kind of wondered that. Like I found this in the research that Amundil was Elendil's father. So Amundil has sailed away. Elendil is kind of reading the signs, like when should we get out of here? Oh, they're sacrificing members of our faith. This isn't good. So I should back this up too, in that one of the symbols of Numenor was the white tree. And you hear about that a lot in Lord of the Rings, right? It was called Nimloth, and it was a tree given by the elves. It's a sign of friendship, and it was planted in the king's court. And yeah, it was a symbol of Numenor. Sauron convinces the Kingsmen to chop it down so they can burn it in service to Morgoth, right? As kind of a pyre to more sacrifice. They're going to sacrifice the white tree as well. So, you know, the faithful hear about this and really don't want that to happen. So Isildur, he's got that point, he's a young soldier basically. He goes to the king's court, basically is almost killed. He suffers very grievous wounds. I assume the tree's being guarded. He fights his way to the tree, gets some fruit from the tree and escapes, barely clinging to life, but with fruit from the white tree. That fruit, now, in the course of the next few thousand years, there are several white trees of Gondor, but all of them date back to this piece of fruit that Isildur stole from the white tree before it was going to be burned by Sauron. And then he took that piece of fruit with him to Middle-earth, and they planted the seeds, and thus the white tree made it from Numenor to Middle-earth. And, you know, the white tree is the symbol of Gondor. It's, you know, it's a big deal. So that's where it traces its roots to. Isildur was the one who was able to save it, bring it to Middle-earth. I thought that was kind of cool. Yeah, disaster is looming, and the great armament is now ready, and Ar-Pharazôn sails west. He's breaking this pact with the Valar at Sauron's command. Sauron, interestingly, does not go with them. He stays on Numenor. He's like, you guys got this. Go capture our enemies, and I'll wait here. All right. The giant navy arrives on the shores of Aman, which is the big continent that the Valar live on, and they start to disembark. Now, interestingly, the Valar are not allowed, they have their own pact. They're not allowed to interfere with humans. I mean, in terms of they can't just kill all the humans. That's against their code. They can't really do anything now. But yet, there's this giant army that's about to wipe them out. So they turn to Eru, the one, the god, basically, to say, hey, can you help us out? We've got these interlopers, and boy, does Eru help them out. So Eru breaks the world, essentially. And this is actually a bit that I think, again, it's going to at least be mentioned, and I think we'll see flashbacks to this event in the Amazon Young Aragorn series. Because this is all about Aragorn's heritage. This is why his people went to Middle-earth, didn't stay on Numenor. This moment in time is incredibly important to Numenor, to Aragorn, to that lineage. There's an ultimate sadness about their downfall that creeps into everything that family line experienced from then on. So I feel like they have to cover this. And plus, it would look really cool if well done. So Eru first basically just smashes Ar-Pharazôn and his army with mountains, basically stones them to death, kills them off. He swallows all the giant navy that's hanging out on the shore. The seas take them out. The whole army is wiped out. Numenor starts suffering, earthquakes. They've got a volcano on the island. It starts to explode, kind of a Pompeii situation. But inevitably, it's like Atlantis, right? In fact, the elven word for it after it sank into the sea, which is what it happens, is Atalanta, which is the elven word for the downfallen. So Numenor sinks into the sea, killing, basically everyone on the island. The people that escape are these 9 ships with Elendil and his family and some others, the faithful, some of the faithful, flee east to Middle-earth. Sauron's body is destroyed on Numenor. However, as you know, he's not completely dead. His spirit is able to return to Mordor, gather strength, and then, of course, the rest. End of Second Age is the War of the Last Alliance, where he gets his finger cut off. End of the Third Age, he's finally defeated. But the downside for Sauron is that he is no longer able to project the appealing, charming visage that he had in years past. He's now going to be this kind of evil, spectral force. The upside is Numenor is wiped out, and those were his major foes. He's like, mission accomplished. Took me 50 years, but this was great, because Numenor is flattened and it's gone and it's literally wiped off the map. The destruction is so great that the coastline of Middle-earth is changed, and the seas carve farther inland, and the whole coastline has changed. Also, major difference here. This is really interesting. Tolkien's like, until this moment when Eru smites the Numenorians, the earth was flat. But in order to make Aman / the home of the Valar unattainable, unreachable, Eru makes the earth round. So what happens is, for instance, if the earth is flat, and here's Aman, here's Valinor, he makes it round, so now Valinor is out in space. Essentially, it's like a satellite now. No way to reach it by ship. You might be asking, well, don't the white ships sail west at the end of Lord of the Rings? Yes, they do. Because the elves were given special access, something called the Straight Road, which was their way of going, basically, spaceships. Frodo's in a rocket. No, but yeah, they actually journey off of what you would consider Earth to go to Aman. It's heaven-ish, right? I mean, that's the idea of the afterlife. But until that moment, Aman was on the same plane of existence, in the same air, in a flat Earth society. Your flat Earthers out there, like, look, Tolkien. But even Tolkien's like, yeah, that wasn't flat always. And so he curves the Earth so that Aman cannot be reached anymore. No matter how far west you sail, you'll never get there because it's out in space. So yeah, those are the major aspects that happen. Obviously, Elendil lands in Middle-earth. He becomes king of Gondor and Arnor. The white tree gets planted. Isildur plants the first of the Middle-earth white trees in front of his house at Minas Ithil. Interestingly, Sauron attacks, takes over Minas Ithil, and destroys that tree as well. And Isildur, and as he escapes Sauron's wrath, takes a sapling from the tree and replants it somewhere else. So Isildur really does his best. He's obviously deeply committed to keeping this tree going. So he does. He's successful at it. So there you have it. As you can see, Sauron was the perpetrator of this horrible downfall, playing on the arrogance and the underlying immorality of the Numenorians, and it cost him his ability to manipulate, let's say. But it gained him the fact that this giant army was no longer against him. And Aragorn survived because Elendil listened to his dad and read the signs, and they took off in a boat while the rest of the island sank into the sea. And so thanks to that, future generations went on until Aragorn could then actually plant. He found a sapling growing near Minas Tirith and planted the new white tree when he became king. And so it, really comes back, the ring of Barahir was, all that stuff was like stuff from Numenor that made its way to Aragorn to become, obviously, the true king. So there you have it, everybody. The downfall of Numenor would be very cinematic. I'm telling, if Amazon, if you're watching, that would be cool to see. Plus, you've got Sauron in there, and you have Elendil, you have some characters that you would recognize. It would be really interesting to see. So there you go, everybody. Thanks so much. We'll be back with Counterpart and Discovery in the near future. Bye, everybody.